Hello, in today's video we're still going to be talking about methods, and today we're going to be talking about how to pass arguments to methods. Going back to our Jackpot application, this is the code that we have created. So basically we have an event handler. So that handles the click on the play picture box button. We display a number on the screen. So we create a 3-digit number that we display on the screen. And then we score the user. And in our score user method, we divide that up into 3 different methods where we first create a number by compiling all of those 3 digits together. And then we apply a winning rule. That is a rule that decides whether the user wins or loses. And then we create a results message that we then display on the screen using a message box. Now, while doing that, we were forced to create some fields. These are variables that are visible to all the methods within the same class. And this is a very bad practice in programming. So unless you really have no other choice, you really don't want to create fields or variables that are visible to all methods. And that is because you don't know the value of these variables. It's very difficult to track the values of these variables if different methods are having access to these variables and are changing the values of these variables throughout your code. So a way to get rid of these field variables, or to avoid using these field variables, is to pass these variables to our methods. And see here in our methods, we do not pass any arguments. So any variables that we pass to the method, so that we give to the method. See, this is our return value. In here, that is the value that is returned from the create number method to our score user method. So it goes from the create number method returning back to the score user method whenever we call this create number method. Now in here on the right hand side, within these parentheses, we're going to create what we call an argument. So that is a variable that is passed from the score user method to the method that we are calling. So in here, our first variable we want to, or our first field we want to get rid of, is our final number. And see why we needed it in the first place. So we create our final number using the create number method, and that is fine. And then we need that final number from within our apply winning rule method. So our apply winning rule method needs to know what that final number is. So instead of having it as a field, we're going to be passing it as an argument. So we're going to have our final number being passed to this method. So we're going to be creating it over here, and then we're going to be saying, all right, for our applied winning rule, take this number and use it. Okay? Now, in here, we need to let this method know that yes, we are taking a variable from our calling function. So our calling function is giving us a number that we're going to be using within our statements right here. So this is going to be int final number. And again, we can use a different name if we want to. The function or the method is intelligent enough to recognize that this is the variable that has been passed from the calling method into our method right here. So we know that this is the number that has come from here, and then we're going to be using it within our statements. We're going to be using it within our rules. So we're creating this number, we are storing it in the final number variable, then we're passing this final number variable to our apply winning rule method. Okay, so this is called an argument. We are passing an argument to this method. And this way, we don't have to have a field. We simply going to declare our variable from within the score user method, and we can comment out this code. And let's try our application, see if it's still working. And yes, it is working. So we were able to get rid of the final number field simply by creating the variable from within the score user. So now this variable is only visible to the score user method. And then what we did is to pass this variable to the function that is going to be needing it, or the function that will use this variable. So instead of having this variable visible to all the methods in our class, we only pass it to the one method that really needs it. And that is our apply when in rule method. All right, now let's try to get rid of our second field, and that is our flag variable. So let's go back and check why we had to create our flag field to begin with. So our apply when in rule method returns a flag. It tells us whether we have a winner or not. Then our create result message needs to know whether we have a winner or not. So we need to have the value of that Boolean variable from within our create result message method to be able to execute these statements. So we're going to do the exact same thing. We will pass this variable as an argument, but this time it's not going to be an integer argument. It will be a Boolean argument. Flag. And again, we can use a different name. We can call it when flag. So if our when flag that has been passed from our calling function right here, so we get this flag by calling the the apply when in rule method, and then whatever is in this variable will be passed to our create result message. So in here we're going to be taking this value from this variable right here, and then we're going to be using it within our code to create our result string or our result message. So now we can go up and get rid of this code. So now instead of having a field, we simply going to have a Boolean variable that is created at the score user method level, and that variable is only visible to the score user method, but is also passed to the only other method that needs it. So it will also be visible to the create result message method. Let's check our code. And surely enough, our code is working. So by simply passing arguments, so here by taking variables and passing them to our methods, we were able to get rid of our fields, which is not a very good practice in programming. This is a much cleaner code, and by doing so, we are avoiding having variables that are being accessed by different methods in the class, which makes it very difficult to track the values of our variables. Now that we have created arguments for our apply when in rule method and our create result message method, and we were able to get rid of our field variables, let's see how we can add in a different argument or another argument to the same method. So instead of having one argument, we can have multiple arguments passed to the same method. So in our apply when in rule, see here how we are using the number 600. Well, let's say we want to change this business rule. Let's say we're only going to have winners if that final number is greater than 700. Well, let's create a variable, and this variable, we'll call it threshold. This variable will include our threshold that differentiate between a winner and a loser. And we can pass this variable as an argument to this apply when in rule method. So in here, we will pass our threshold as another argument to our method. So see here, we have two different arguments for the same method. And the compiler is complaining simply because we need to tell it, hey, we're going to have another argument. So this is our threshold. So instead of using a fixed number, which is 600, we're going to be using a variable. So that is a threshold that decides whether the user wins or loses. Let's go back and test that. So now we lose because we got 618, and we have just changed our threshold to 700 instead of 600. We still lose, and now our probability of winning is much smaller. All right, now we got a 908, and now we win. So it did change our business rule. Okay? Now, instead of using a variable, if we know that this value will not change, or we want to set a default value, so instead of having a variable that we're going to be changing, we want to pass a default value to our second argument right here. And this is how we do it. So instead of creating a variable called threshold, in here we create a constant, and it would still be referred to as threshold int, but this time we tell it, all right, this is our threshold. If the number is greater than 500, then we have a winner. So by default, we give it a value of 500, and in here we don't have to pass a variable. So let's try and test that. So it is working. We have changed our threshold to a constant number, and that constant number is set to 500. That is our default value for our threshold variable. 500 is the default value for the threshold, and that allows us to only pass the final number as an argument to our apply winning rule method. Now, we can still override that default value of 500 and pass our threshold variable, which is set to 700. So this is how this code will work. If we call the function by simply using one variable, if we call this function using this one variable, it will take it and it will use the default of 500 for our threshold. If, however, we call the apply winning rule method using our threshold variable, this 700 will override the default value of 500 and it will use the value 700. All right, so let's try both ways and see how that works. So now we're calling the method simply with one variable. See here, we win simply by going over 500. Now, we're going to do the exact same thing, but this time we will use our threshold variable. See how we did not change our code right here. It is still set to a default of 500. The code knows that if we only have one argument to this function, we will use our default. If, however, we pass in another argument, then this new argument will override our 500 default value. Let's try that. So see here, we won over 700, and whenever we go above 500, we still lose. That is because we are passing a second argument which overrides our default value of 500. All right, and that concludes our video for today, and see you next time.